it's TJYYC, and welcome to my analysis of why critics are wrong on preferring Star Wars Episode 7 over Rogue One. And it is only critics that prefer Star Wars Episode 7 over Rogue One. You'll see that on both IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes, that users rate the movies as the same. And I think this comes back to how critics view films, and they don't view films like regular moviegoers. And I think there's a problem if movie producing companies only take into account critic reviews as opposed to user reviews, or put more stock in them, and I'll explain why. I think that critics are more prone to nostalgia. I believe that they've watched the old movies, in this case the old Star Wars movies, seen the iconic movies, seen the iconic characters, and like seeing them reprise these roles even more than I think the average moviegoer does. And that's because it's very important to them to see the whole art of film develop. And I don't think that's a big concern for the average moviegoer. Many average moviegoers looked at Episode 7 and they said, well, they just built another Death Star, a bigger one, except this one shoots only twice. And it doesn't really gel, as a brand new story. It's just, it rhymes. Oh, it's cyclical mythology and other ways that they want to. You can dress up an idea of non-originality in Star Wars Episode 7. And I hope that we see a little bit more originality in Star Wars Episode 8. I think that valuing originality was one of the big things that elevates Rogue One. But why Rogue One seen as a lot more original to most people? And I think that certainly there's no Death Star. Well, there is a Death Star, but they're not fighting it. They're just looking for the Death Star plans. And the whole process of going for the plans is a completely different movie than the than a movie about blowing up the Death Star. We're going to lots of interesting locals, including a new tropical location, because the Empire wants to have a nice tropical base at least somewhere. Not everything has to be volcanic Mustafar, like we see Darth Vader's built his house on. Probably for some psychological reasons that are complicated. But I think the main addition of Rogue One was grayness, and grayness of characters. It's not light side, it's not dark side anymore, it's gray. And I think for a lot of critics this actually runs counter to the idea of nostalgia. Because all the old movies where they were black and white, and this is gray, doesn't fit the mythos, as some critics might see. And I think with the current crop of movies out, that critics are bored of grayness, and television as well. Like, you look at a lot of the Marvel movies, they're a little bit darker. Deadpool's a gray character, definitely. You have Game of Thrones, you have Breaking Bad, and these type of shows just in general, where you sympathize with gray protagonists. I think critics are bored of that. But I think a lot of people that might have went to this movie hadn't seen a lot of that stuff. I will admit I haven't watched Game of Thrones. People tell me I should. I've watched a little bit of Breaking Bad, but couldn't get into it. Sherlock's just come out, so I'll watch some of that, and that's gray as well. But I don't think that this is a fad. I think it's just a more compelling way of telling stories. And I think critics, in some way, might almost be seeing this almost like a fad. However, grayness is how the series can evolve. If, we just have the great good rebellion and the evil empire, right, it starts to become not dynamic as a story. And this kind of idea of a 0% approval rating empire is not very believable. And Rogue One is at its core a war movie. Like we have like battles between people in a very scrappy way, and that adds to the grayness. There's going to be civilians that get injured. At the early point in the movie, Cassian has to shoot someone that's brought him information, so he's not captured by the Empire. That's a very gray thing to have to do. And Cassian says, I've committed terrible things in the name of the rebellion, but I do so because I believe in the cause. However, I think a lot of critics, they have this kind of like plate that they want to go through with Star Wars. It's just like, good, evil, but maybe I can get away with like not having like a Jedi. Although I think that a lot of people even wanted that, right? They want to conform to this kind of journey, Jedi-style journey with Jyn Erso again. But I think that I'm very happy this movie went in a different direction. Some people say that the movie would have been if Galen Erso, the constructor of the Death Star, was evil, and Jyn had to convince him to not be evil and have the story of redemption, because that would make the story more compelling. But I think it's even more compelling to have kind of a double agent, a gray character that's putting in a flaw into the system. It's a different story, and actually a lot more believable in this kind of idea of going into exile and then Jyn being separated from this, and that Saw is gone, very nutty too. He's not a perfectly good character working for the rebellion either. Like, he tortures people. Like, that is also adding a lot more depth to the movie. And so I find that Rogue One is a deep movie, kind of proposing, perhaps, let not perfect be the enemy of good. Like, you can be a force for good without being a force for perfection. Because you're not going to fight a war with someone as evil and oppressive as the Empire by trying to be perfect. And I think that a lot of people that want this kind of constricted story of good and evil don't see Star Wars as the universe that it really belongs in. So like Star Trek is seen as a universe. It is able to tackle many themes because it's not constricted to storylines like I felt like all the other Star Wars movies have been constricted to. But if you start making movies like Rogue One, you can really expand the universe. And this kind of idea of redemption also being a key theme in Rogue One. So you have like an Imperial starfighter pirate who, ends up working for the rebellion. You have a droid that's been reprogrammed and, kind of definitely K2SO is like one of my favorite Star Wars droids. And it allows a lot of latitude when you're willing to like take a step off and make some risks. And in a way that this movie, not an attempt to try to be perfect, not trying to be safe, has become very good. Where I think Episode 7 became very boring in a big hurry. Also because Rey is also maybe a little bit too good, a little bit too perfect as a character. There's not as much to be compelling about Rey as a character. And maybe she'll gain like a little bit more development, in Episode 8. But there should still have been some development in Episode 7. And maybe that'll explain away some level of why she's so good at stuff in Episode 8. It'll be explained by the plot, and then we'll go back and say, ha. But as a protagonist, there should be some development of that character to be compelling. I'm not saying every character has to have development either. Certainly, when we look at Jyn's father, Galen Erso, he doesn't necessarily have a lot of development in there. The development's done before the movie. Like, he works for the Imperials designing weapons. Then, at the beginning of the movie, he's defecting, and now he has to, like, put the trap in, the ticking time bomb in the Death Star. The little exhaust port vent that they failed to cover up with plywood because they don't know that it's there. And just the pacing of it, it's easy to keep track of things. Like, and it makes sense, when you have the general there, Krennic. I actually have a hard time with movies, remembering everybody's name. And this movie was actually difficult for me to remember my names of people, so as like maybe a point of improvement, we can fix names, but I don't know how you fix names. As far as Krennic and Jyn, everyone is all constantly addressing them, but Baze and Sherrod, no, I couldn't remember them. And in fact, I'm even looking at the IMDb page in front of me, telling the story there. So I think that having like character development within the main protagonist, and having some like ancillary character development, and then having like a lot of action, a lot of things being interesting, a lot of things being done. Certainly a lot of things were done in this movie, and I think that made it really compelling to watch. And the whole movie wasn't just a fan service. They were telling a story, and that really resonated with me. The movies were made with roughly the same budget, like $240 million for Episode 7, $200 million for Rogue One, and Rogue One's probably not going to make as much money, although fortunately it has made money. So it definitely doesn't mean that Star Wars shows told in this way are going to die. But I just want, full movies, not just like the animated Star Wars, to be told with dynamic, compelling stories, like Rogue One in the future, and less like The Force Awakens, where we build like the 4th and 5th Death Star. All right, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Pressure's so high. Like, we're making a film that's right touching my favourite movie of all time. But then if you're too respectful of it, that you daren't do anything new or different, take a risk, then what are you bringing to the table?
Exactly. And I hope those vibroblades are in the special features.